emotional intelligence in leadership. I want to use this opportunity once again to say welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Peter Adejo, and I am the head government relations at TL First. You are all welcome. Before we proceed, we would be applying the Chatham rules. Please feel free to ask your questions. Feel free to make your comments, because whatever you say here stays here, remains here. It's not going outside here. At TL First, we are a consulting management group that are professionals in executive leadership education, performance management systems, ECM. And we are also transformational leaders across the globe. Our services cuts across Asia, the United States, Europe, and Africa. And we are lucky to have Professor Olusegun Olasode as our chairman. He is a seasoned academic, a transformational leader who has over 35 years experience in managing talents, in managing people, and in managing transformation across the globe. He's our executive chairman. We're glad to have him with us. Now, before we go on, I want to allow the audience to tell us, give us their feedback. What do they expect from today's topic, emotional intelligence in executive in leadership position? I know we have heard that word severally, emotional intelligence, but what are our expectations? I'll take one or two questions from our participants. Please feel free to give us your contribution. What do you expect after today's webinar? How do you intend to apply it at your organizations? Questions, anyone? I'll give us 1 or 2 minutes for this interaction quickly before we move ahead. Can anyone tell us what the expectations are? Okay, while you are preparing yourself, permit me to introduce the speakers. We have with us Mrs. Maureen Carey, all the way from the UK. She's a leadership consultant, and she has an organization that focuses on leadership, on growing people. And we also have in our midst Mrs. Atinuke Oyewumi, who is a strategic leadership consultant. She's also an expert in emotional intelligence. We're lucky to have these two people with us to talk about the topic emotional intelligence. What is their understanding of the topic emotional intelligence? Now, what is emotional intelligence? By a brief introduction, emotional intelligence is our ability to understand situations, our ability to be able to interact completely with our colleagues, our co-workers, our employees, and then our ability to also be able to mitigate situations whereby we don't get emotive or whereby we don't allow our emotions get in the way of the decisions that we make. This has to do with us having self-awareness. This also has to do with us having to regulate how we feel, how we relate with people, how we interact, and also help us positively handle situations that ordinarily may degenerate to scenarios that may affect productivity. Do we have anybody who wants to tell us what the expectations are before I call up the speakers? Any of our participants want to say something? You can drop your message in the chat box. Yeah. Princess Victor, please, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, sir, and thank you for everybody. One thing I want to pick up from this training is that I want to learn how to physically position myself and my organization as part of the technical know-how and technical competence. I want to learn more on how to use emotional intelligence to strategically position myself and my organization to achieve our common goal and our results.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your contribution. She wants to, through this webinar, learn about emotional intelligence and how to interact with her colleagues and how to do better about her employees and increase productivity. Well, before I call up the speakers, there are certain house rules we need to observe. Please put your phones in mute. Please, while the speakers are speaking, you should kindly mute your system so that it does not interact with what the speakers are saying. At this point, I welcome you all once again specially. Permit me the indulgence to call in Mrs. Atinuke Oyewumi, our first speaker, who will be speaking on the topic emotional intelligence and leadership. Mrs. Atinuke, ma'am, you are welcome. You have 30 minutes to make your presentation. Thank you, ma'am.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Hello from wherever you're joining us from. Okay, so my name is Atinuke Oyewumi, and I'll say it's quite a privilege to be a part of this program today. I'm always happy when I'm being called upon to talk about emotional intelligence. Well, not just because I like to teach, which is what I do for a living, but also because it has transformed my own life personally. And of course, it has helped me really, to succeed in my career. So I'm always excited to talk about it. So let me appreciate the management of TL first for this opportunity to speak on the topic, emotional intelligence today. And most especially as we look at it from the angle of leadership. It's really an opportunity. So I am going to share my screen, and once I'm able to do this, then we can hit the ground running. All right, I've listened to some of the expectations that we have. And I can say that, yes, we all are in the right place today to learn about emotional intelligence. Whatever we learn here today will not only help us to do well at work or in leadership, it will also help us greatly in our personal lives, as I said before, that have benefited largely from this. So thank you, Mr. Peter, for that introduction to emotional intelligence. That you actually touched on, some critical areas, which I am also going to address as we move into the topic. You talked about awareness, okay? And that's one component of emotional intelligence. As a matter of fact, it is the first component of emotional intelligence, but incidentally also, on the ladder of leadership, they always say that the first rung of that ladder is self-awareness. So when a leader is not self-aware, you can almost say that that's disastrous, and as the case may be. So let's look at what the session for today has for us. This training or this session is built on the simple understanding that leadership is always people-centric. When you say leadership, it means people are involved. You cannot lead machines, right? You can manage, but then anytime you say leadership, it means there is active involvement with the people who are around you. And again, leadership is that art of rallying people around a shared purpose and then going ahead to motivate them and also mobilizing them to achieve that purpose. We all know that a leader cannot get results alone, no matter how intelligent you are. So you definitely need people to key into your vision and get results with you. And of course, because people are such complex creatures, how many of us agree that people are complex? Every time I say this, people will say, yeah, it's true, people are complex. We are talking about ourselves. You may look at others as being complex. At the same time, other people are looking at you as being complex. I think it's just human nature. So it means that leaders always have to learn. You never get to that point where you finish learning your craft and people will spring surprises on you. You can have someone today who's loyal at work, who's committed to work, and in the next 3 weeks down the line, the person is actually not even interested in working again, or something has tipped them off balance. So a leader must always know how to manage such situations. So we have a session map, and we're going to look at the concept of emotional intelligence briefly, and then we'll touch on the pressing need for emotional intelligence, most especially in the world that we live in today. And then, of course, from Daniel Goleman, who made emotional intelligence very popular, we're going to look at the domains of emotional intelligence. There are 5 of them. And then lastly, I'll just share a very brief case scenario, from a book on how to practice emotional intelligence. Let me say this. The first time I took a session on emotional intelligence was in 2008. And I'll say that at that point in my life, I had not fully understood what the challenges of leadership could be. So I was just speaking from a theoretical, perspective. But over the years, I've been able to see that sometimes people just say emotional intelligence, but not many people understand how to practice it. So I've had to change the way I teach it to helping people understand how to use it so you can get the benefits of it. And that is why we're going to use that case study on emotional intelligence. So this is the concept. It used to be that in management many years ago, when people graduated with a first class, you would rapidly give them a job. And even on that job, they may get rapidly promoted, okay? And this went on for years until they started to discover that the fact that some people are able to maybe comprehend faster than others does not necessarily mean that they can succeed in leadership roles. It is one thing to be technically capable, but yet another thing to have people management skills, or most especially leadership skills. So you can be a perfect engineer, a very great accountant, but as I always say, accounting is not leadership. Engineering is not leadership. To be able to lead effectively, every individual must learn what leadership entails. So this makes us to now compare emotional intelligence versus intelligent quotient. It's always a very good thing to talk about in the workplace. I've seen leaders who would say, I'm not going to take this. Why did they not give me that role? I'm the most qualified. And people say it with all confidence. But yes, maybe they're the most qualified technically. But when it comes to getting along with others, how qualified are they? When it comes to developing others, how well do they do? And there are lots and lots of things to explore. So yes, you need technical competence, but in order for you to lead effectively, you must be strong in emotional intelligence. I hope you're getting something from this. So this takes us to a definition. It's not far from what Mr. Peter defined earlier, just for us to have a common understanding of what emotional intelligence is. So we see it as that ability to understand your emotions and manage them so that you can use them in positive ways. And every time I talk about this, I often get some responses where people would say, oh yes, it's important to, use your emotions positively because negative emotions can destroy. And people are quick to say, anger can destroy. And then I ask them, what about excitement that you cannot manage effectively? Can it destroy also? So the idea is whatever emotion you have has to be subjected to some level of control. And that's where the intelligence comes in. We all have emotions in us. As a matter of fact, we say a human being is just a bundle of emotions, right? You can wake up happy, excited, and then just see a flash of news on CNN or any other television media house, and then suddenly you've lost your joy, or you pick up a call and then your mood or your day is just ruined because of that. So different things can happen to keep you off balance, and you must now know how to manage yourself such that it ends up positively for you. I'll just talk briefly about VUCA, since this is in our objective, to look at the complexity of leadership today. Former US Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, had come up with this matrix where he said, usually when you're leading or, in life, you always have known knowns. These are things that you perfectly understand and you're aware of. You also have known unknowns. You know what you don't know, okay? You're aware of those things, but you don't understand them. And then you have unknown knowns. These are things you understand, okay, but you're not aware that those things are happening, to you. And then lastly, you have unknown knowns, which are things you're not aware of, or things you do not even understand. So VUCA, it's important to mention that VUCA originated from the US military also, after they were hit by the September 9/11, attack. And it occurred to them that no matter how well prepared they thought they were, there were certain things they just did not know, and challenges came from different angles. So from that point on, it had become a very popular, of course, the word had been there still from the military, became more popular from that attack onwards. So we're saying here that leadership is complex. Sometimes the change you're faced with, you cannot even predict it, and it's happening at a very fast rate. Also, you may be facing a lot of uncertainty as a leader, and still you need to make decisions. How do you lead courageously when you're not even sure what next step to take? What about ambiguity? You just have layers and layers of things. So sometimes when people are commenting on, issues about Nigeria or national television, I would say there's so many things people are talking about. They do not even know what the real issues are. Okay? There's so many things that we do not understand. They're just ambiguous. Okay? Because there are factors, complex factors interacting together to make situations really difficult and the way they are. What I am trying to say here is that leadership comes with a lot of pressure, okay? And this is what lets us see the need for emotional intelligence. Just try to imagine if a leader is trying to grapple with VUCA and then you're not doing well, how do you think that leader would be able to come across in the workplace? How would they come across? Would they be able to build relationships well? Imagine you're all stressed out. You don't even know what next to do. People are looking up to you, and even you don't know what the way forward is. If you're not careful as a leader, you may discover that instead of actually being able to, lead and get the people to rally around the vision, you would alienate the people from you. They get separated from you because you are under pressure, and that pressure is really, weighing down on you or the way you come across. So this is the crucial need for emotional intelligence, and I'm going to explain it better here. As I said, the pressure is always there for leaders, except you're not leading, because there are people who occupy positions, leadership positions, but they're not leading. But when you're really leading, it's challenging, okay? And the two main things that leaders usually have to do, number one is to get results. You must get results, okay? And the second thing, which is a higher calling of leadership, that's developing others. So on one hand, some people can get results, but by the time they're done, people say, I don't ever want to work with that leader again. Okay? So that means the project was successful, but the leader was not successful. So try to imagine a situation where you have a vision, you are strategizing on how to go about it. As the leader, you're not the person who's going to go into the field. You're not going to, you are working at the strategic level. but you have foot soldiers, you have people on the operational and the tactical levels who are going to get things done. If you're not able to build effective relationships with those people, it becomes almost impossible for you or the organization as a whole to get results. Okay, I hope it's clearer that way for us to see the need for leaders to be able to lead themselves first before they lead others. To lead yourself is to be able to manage your emotions. If you're upset before you leave the house, by the time you get to work, you shouldn't bleed on the people who didn't cut you. You should not dump your aggression on the people who know nothing about what happened to you before. Okay? It's also important that we're able to see how this works practically. There are 3 levels that I'm going to share here when we're talking about emotional competencies. The first level would be that an individual can demonstrate the ability to deal with pressure and other workplace stressors appropriately. Okay? You have things coming at you and you can deal with them. This is one level. The second level would be that an individual can handle pressure and stressful situations effectively so that productivity is not affected. It is one thing to deal with the pressure and you're still there. In HR, we call it presenteeism. You know, it used to be absenteeism back in the days. People wouldn't come to work. But today they've come to work. They're wearing beautiful suits like Mr. Peter's suits, you know, but they're not just producing. Okay. So for you to be able to do that, you must be able to identify and negotiate personal boundaries and also request assistance when needed. That's another level of emotional intelligence. But let's see the third level here. You have an individual who's able to handle complex, stressful situations with diplomacy, with calmness, and good judgment. And that person can help to reduce workplace stressors for themselves and for other people. They can also coach and assist others as appropriate. This is the big deal. You can help yourself, and then you can help others. And it's important to say that this is where leadership happens. This is where leadership resides. If you're at the first level, yes, we may say you're doing well, you're managing yourself. At the second level, well, yes, you're managing yourself and you're getting results. But at the third level, you're managing yourself, you're managing the situation, and you're helping others also to get results. That's leadership. So let's go deeply into the components of emotional intelligence. As I said before, I think in 1991 or 1995 thereabout, Daniel Goleman wrote that book, Emotional Intelligence, Why It Matters More Than IQ, you know, in the workplace. And he let us know that you have intrapersonal effectiveness, okay? And then you also have interpersonal effectiveness. So your intrapersonal realm, okay, would mean your self-awareness. That's the first component of emotional intelligence. That's your intrapersonal realm. The second component is self-control. Let's see this. Some people are aware, for example, that they are short-tempered, okay? They say, see, I have a very short fuse, don't come near me. But they're not able to control themselves, even though they're able to recognize that. So it's one thing to be aware, and yet another thing to control the impulse when you want to do something that will lead to a negative situation. And thirdly, in that intrapersonal realm, we have self-motivation. Self-motivation is what lets you have a sense of purpose, a sense of self-direction, such that no matter how challenging things are, you can still forge ahead. And I always say this, if the leader is not motivated, what's the hope, you know, that anything good can happen? Imagine having a leader who's leading everyone and that person is demoralized. What's the hope that things will get better? So these 3 components within us must be managed well for us to be able to achieve interpersonal effectiveness. And when you get the intrapersonal right, you're able to sometimes maybe empathize with other people. Even sometimes the people who are treating you badly, there's a quote that says, respond intelligently, even to unintelligent treatment, right? For you to be able to do that, it means you're empathizing with that person who's treating you unintelligently, that, oh, I just wish they knew better. If they knew better, they would do better. And in the case of leadership, a leader must be able to understand what certain things mean to other people. You may not go through that thing yourself. You may not face that difficulty yourself. But empathy would mean that you can put yourself in the situation, okay, and try to understand what would this mean for this person. And then lastly, the fifth component of emotional intelligence is social skills. Social skills. Under social skills, you have approachability, you have communication, okay? This is the seat of people's skills. So if you ever go for any emotional intelligence course, you should never leave without understanding the 5 components of emotional intelligence: self-awareness, self-control, self-motivation, which belong in the intrapersonal realm, and then, of course, empathy and social skills that belong in the interpersonal realm. When you combine these 2 realms, then we can say you have emotional intelligence. At the beginning, I know that a participant, I think Princess Victor, had said she wants to know how to position herself. So Princess, if you're listening, how to position yourself would be that you understand yourself, you know yourself, and you know how to manage yourself when you're with other people. When you have this going for you, it helps you to navigate the complexities of interpersonal relationships or even your career as a whole. I hope this is working for you. So, for leadership effectiveness to happen, as I said before, your intrapersonal realm will give you personal competence, and your interpersonal realm will give you social competence. So when you're looking for a leader, you want someone who has personal competence and also who has social competence. When you have such a person, it's usually not hard for the organization to move forward, because you would usually have great teamwork, okay? You have effective decision making. You see people collaborating effectively when everyone has a high level of emotional intelligence. All right. So from this point, remember I said it is one thing to keep talking about emotional intelligence, and yet another thing to practically understand how we need to use it. I'll just share briefly something I read. There's a powerful book that this woman wrote, Kathy Black. Her name is Kathy Black. She was once the president of Hearst magazines. This is a very wonderful book. I have my own copy here. I bought it some years back. But then something happened. She had an experience that I feel helps us see how things go wrong in the organization. For example, she had interviewed for a job, and they had given her the position of president. That was a leadership role. But one of the things she did not do was to clarify reporting lines. Okay, the fact that they said, oh, we're giving you the position of president, just made her believe or assume that everyone would report to her. Meanwhile, the organization had tactically given her that role because, yes, they needed her expertise, but they didn't want her leadership. They needed her expertise, and they knew she wouldn't accept anything less than that. When she got the role and she started to work, it was clear to her that she only had the office, but not the authority that came with the office. What do you do in a situation like this as a leader? You're supposed to be leading, but no one is reporting to you, or the people who should report to you, are not reporting to you. Let me show us what happens. So what you suddenly see is that there is a wide gap between your reality and what you are expecting. That gap between our expectations and what our reality says needs to be managed effectively. If you react to people, you may never recover from, that challenge. I've seen leaders who are appointed, and then when they're appointed, they suddenly discover that, oh, things are not what I thought they would be. Oh, even this person is not who I thought he was, or this woman is not who I thought she was, And then from that point, they start to react to people rather than define what reality is and respond to the situation. So emotional intelligence is basically, are you reacting or are you responding? You cannot respond if you don't have emotional intelligence. And when you're reacting, you're not really thinking deeply about your actions. You're just giving it back to people, the way things are coming at you. So how did she manage that wide gap? John Maxwell, who's a leadership author, also says that the first job of a leader is to define reality, because often it will be different from what you thought it would be. So when she defined it, it was stark different, miles away from what she was expecting. Unfortunately for her, at that level, she didn't have such high emotional intelligence. She kept reacting to everyone, all of the other executives. And you can be sure that that organization really suffered for it, But as I said, what we need to do when we have emotional intelligence is to make that choice, in spite of what the reality says, to make the choice and tell yourself, okay, this is what it is. I'm going to define the situation and respond to this situation and not react to the people. Okay, so a leader needs to be able to do what is required at all times. And I said, it's just about choosing intelligent actions. Remember what I said before also, you must be able to respond intelligently, even to unintelligent treatments. Have you learned anything so far? Am I going too fast? Is it working for you? If you type in some things in the chat box, I will be able to understand how this is going. So you think and reflect about the certain situations that you have been faced with as a leader. Sometimes you have a project. It's a very brilliant idea to you, of course. But then as soon as you raise it, another person across the room just shuts it down and says, what are you even talking about? That's not even practical, or that does not even make sense. How do you feel? What do you do? Do you tell them, what do you mean? How dare you say that? Or do you say, oh, it's interesting. I'm trying to understand your point of view. Can you explain to me why you think this does not make sense? That would mean that you have composure under pressure. And that's emotional intelligence for you. Your ability to stay calm and be composed regardless of what's going on around you, most especially as a leader. Because remember, people are looking up to you, and you're also supposed to be developing others. So when you are struggling badly, I remember there was this case of a bank director, as a matter of fact, a Nigerian bank that has a branch in another African country, Liberia precisely. And this manager, the managing director, had walked into the bank and was engaging with a teller. This guy was, the teller. And I don't know what went wrong. The man got really upset, or furious, I would say. And then he picked a desk calculator and flung it at the guy. That calculator cut him on the lips, and then, he started bleeding. People just made a video. Before you knew it, everything went viral. Before you knew it, the Central Bank of Liberia called the Nigerian branch to say, or the headquarters to say, with immediate effect, please remove that person from that position, because we do not tolerate abuse. So think of that situation. That's the person you want to learn from. That's the person who should role model, who lost the ability to manage whatever the challenge was. Let's also remember that sometimes the people who are leading us have leaders themselves. Okay, even if you're reporting to a president, or at some point you're reporting to someone yourself. So there is always that pressure, which followers also, need to understand, but they cannot cut you the slack if you start to pick objects and throw objects, because of the pressure you are going through. Have we seen the need for emotional intelligence in our discussion today? Have you gained something? Have you found something useful? How can you succeed in leadership with emotional intelligence? As I said, in a pressured workplace, the stress of projects and also the behavior, the angst of your colleagues can sometimes reach uncomfortable levels. I've seen leaders who would say, I do not do direct conversation with people who are several levels below me because I know they'll get on my nerves. Okay? So I make sure that they report to another person who tells me what the situation is. And that's their own way of managing the situation. So you must know yourself. You must know what you can take. You must know your threshold. And it's also important that you must keep a tab on that threshold. Sometimes people will say, oh no, it's not a problem, I can take it. And they misunderstand emotional intelligence for emotional suppression. So they begin to suppress their feelings. And then one day, out of nowhere, you just have this eruption. And even they are shocked, that they will just get up and slap someone and say, I've taken it from you for so long, I can't, have it anymore. Before you got to that point, you should know that you're reaching that point, where you wouldn't be able to take it any longer. Something happened in one of the organizations I consult for. They had this guy who was so emotionally unstable. It really was a problem because it was almost always in, friction with every other person. And then it got to a point we had to start saying, are you sure this thing is not tilting towards mental, a mental challenge or something, because it just was extreme. But unfortunately, there was this very cool and calm guy who had worked, for years in the organization also, who had an encounter with that troublesome guy someday. And before you knew it, the calm guy picked up a chair and was going to hit, that guy. That's the difficult person. Of course, the workplace policy says you don't assault. Sadly, that guy was, dismissed. He was dismissed. He needed the job more because at least he had a family, and all of that. But that's what can happen when you think that you can tolerate and tolerate and tolerate. So I think I saw a question where someone was saying, how do you balance being assertive? I'm not sure, maybe when we get to the question and answer part, we'll look at that. But basically, as I said, emotional intelligence would allow you to remain calm, handle stress correctly, and also manage your relationships with your colleagues so that the workplace can be a great place to be. Mr. Peter, the way you're smiling is passing a message to me. You haven't told me to stop, but I'm reading your cues. Is my time up? I'll be glad to take a break so that we take questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Mrs. Atinuke Oyewumi. I want to believe that everybody have benefited immensely from your slides. I knew a few things about emotional intelligence, but after these slides now and your presentation, I think I have learned more that I will apply personally. Before I go ahead, I want to thank our participants from all around the globe, especially our participants from Kigali, from Kampala, from Uganda, and from Ghana. At this point, I would also want to thank all the CEOs and all the Director Generals and MDs that have taken their time to participate in this webinar. We welcome you all. I welcome everyone. Please, before we go into the Q&A, I would like to call on Mrs. Maureen Carew, the CEO of Right Impressions in the UK, to please give us an additional comment, at least before we now delve into the Q&A. Mrs. Maureen, you're welcome, ma'am. Good to have you.
Thank you very much. If I can just be given permission so that I can share my slides. Good afternoon, everyone. And once again, I really want to give a round of applause to Mrs. Oyewumi. What a brilliant, brilliant presentation. And I have been educated, I've been enlightened. As a leadership coach, I do deal with emotional intelligence. And so hearing somebody else's view, and like we all know as leaders, we are learning all the time. Leaders are learners. So you never say, you know, you've heard it all, you know it all. And I just want to also thank the leadership of TL First for giving me this opportunity to share my views. And I'm so happy that I'm actually coming in at a very different angle. So everything just complements each other today. So I'm really, really glad. I will not be repeating, but just adding a few bits, not because there's a gap, but because we're just adding to the body of learning that we already have. So thank you very much. I'm just going to go ahead right now and share my slides. Okay, fantastic. So welcome everyone. Thank you for your patience. You've been here for quite some time, and definitely you're in for a good time. I'm starting from the conclusion. So my name is Maureen Carew, and I'm going to be talking about the power and pitfalls of emotional intelligence. We've all heard about, how great and how needful emotional intelligence is in the workplace. But my session, I'm going to bring us to that realization that even though this emotional intelligence is so needed, there are also cause for caution. Okay, so first of all, I want to refresh our minds as to what the definition of emotional intelligence is. It's the ability to recognize, understand, manage, and influence our own emotions and the emotions of others. That's a tall order. First of all, for you to recognize, understand, manage, influence your own emotions, and then you have the responsibility for the emotions of others. That's a tall order. And how can we do that? I think I want to first of all lay the foundation that everybody has emotional intelligence. The issue is, how well have you developed it? And I'll give you a very good example. Who sat down to teach little children to cry when they want the attention of their parents? I'm not talking of babies. I'm talking of children who know exactly when to press the buttons of their parents. I remember when I was young, we normally wait, my brothers and my siblings and I, we would normally wait for when our parents have visitors. And then we go and ask for money, because we know that because the visitors are there, they are going to give us the money. They won't want any disturbance. They also don't want to appear like they're bad parents. That's emotional intelligence, because we have taken time to study our parents and to know how to get the best out of them. Selfishly, though, I must add, and that is the pitfalls that we're talking about, the power that is in emotional intelligence. And so we need to all be aware that we can use emotional intelligence for good or for bad. I want to also talk about somebody like Hitler. He was very emotionally intelligent. That's why he turned a whole nation against a particular ethnic group within Germany. And look at what happened. Till today, the memory of First World War and Second World War will continue to linger on. That is emotional intelligence at the highest level. Having the ability to use emotional intelligence in such a way that it destroys. And so with everything, there are always two sides to a coin. You can either use something positively or you can use it negatively. And that's why I want to highlight the power and the pitfalls that is in emotional intelligence. Why emotional intelligence matters? Number one, it has an impact on our personal lives. It enhances our self-awareness. I remember as a young girl, I used to be very moody. And when I get into my moods, they're so dark and so overpowering that it actually affects our family life. And I remember my parents used to be so frustrated, like, what is going on? And one of the ways that I was able to conquer it was, first of all, recognizing when, what those triggers are. What are the things that trigger my moods? And not until I began to, first of all, study myself. And that's why, when we talk about leadership and we say leaders must lead themselves first, it's very true. Because without me recognizing those triggers, I keep affecting my family in a negative way. I'm bringing everybody down with me. But the moment I began to study myself and I said to myself, what exactly are my triggers? And then I was on the lookout for those triggers. I remember, I used to say to my aunt, whenever I used to feel the wave of those moods coming up, I would say to my aunt, oh, I think it's coming now, it's coming now. Like we just really did it and managed it. And I'm so glad I've been able to overcome it. And it's as simple as that. You don't even have to be a leader for you to know how to use emotional intelligence in a positive way. So it helps to improve stress levels in your life, and it helps in conflict resolution. No matter the type of relationship you're in, whether in marriage, whether in business partnership, if you are able to manage, first of all, recognize, manage your emotions, you'll be able to get along fine. It doesn't mean that there will be no conflict, but there will be first of all, it won't be every day that emotions are erupting in your relationships. And secondly, because you are able to manage, first of all, recognize those things in your life and you are able to manage them, it means that it won't have a negative knock-on effect on people around you. It also has an impact on your professional life. It helps you to lead people better. It helps you to be a part of a team so that you're there to contribute, not to be, an obstacle in the wheel of progress, and for the general workplace satisfaction. And then there are also mental health benefits to being emotionally intelligent. It helps in emotional regulation, reducing anxiety, and promoting overall well-being. So what are the pros of emotional intelligence? It helps to improve communication, better understanding on nonverbal cues. How many of us know that just looking at someone before, and Lady Atinuke did it very well when she noticed that Brother Peter, Mr. Peter Adejo, looked at her in a particular way. And I smiled to myself. I said, this, when you talk about physician heal thyself, this is exactly what it is, because she picked that cue. He didn't even need to say anything. She just looked at his face and she was able to understand the nonverbal cue that he had sent to her. And that's what we're talking about. Enhanced leadership abilities. Again, Lady Atinuke has really spoken extensively about that. I don't want to repeat it, other than to just read what I have here, which says leaders with high emotional intelligence are more empathetic, they're more adaptable, and they are better at managing teams. I'll just give you an example. Somebody comes into work, they're normally cheerful, and this particular day, they just look down in the dumps. You don't need anybody to let you know that something is wrong somewhere, especially if that kind of person is usually upbeat. And so you approaching that person, getting to understand what the reason is for the difference in appearance is enough to even endear you to that person. Number one, that person will be grateful that, you were able to pick up on their vibes. And then you being able to empathize with them and see what can be done to, help them in whatever situation they found themselves in. You're going to be rated highly in your leadership performance. And that's what we are talking about. It helps, to make relationships, the bonds within relationships to be stronger. EI promotes understanding and empathy, creating stronger bonds and more meaningful relationships. Like I said earlier, it helps to resolve conflicts. When you're highly intelligent emotionally, then you are able to pick up on cues in the office. One of the things, and I'm not trying to blow my horn, one of the things that I love to do in the office, in the workplace, is to try and diffuse tension. Whenever I feel that somebody's voice is going higher than it ought to, I would just try and step in and call the other person out and just say, you know what, we need to ease the tension within the office. And it has really worked. And, a lot of times I bring both parties together to say, you know what, let's sit down, let's listen to each other. Because many times, because we are struggling and we want to pass our own views and opinions across, we don't take time to listen to the other person. One of the things that I learned when I went for my MBA, and I would say the greatest thing that I learned was that I'm not the only one with good ideas. And, it may sound so simple, but the thing is, if you've been in leadership position for so long, there is that tendency, I mean, it's a human flaw, where you just, you've been in the place where you dish out the orders. It's very hard sometimes to take correction, to actually think that other people have good ideas. And that's one of the things that emotional intelligence will do. Greater self-motivation and resilience. These are just a few of the pros of emotional intelligence. What about the cons? I mentioned earlier about children, that nobody teaches a child to say, manipulate your parents. I remember when I was young, I used to boast that I could twist my dad around my little finger. That's emotional intelligence. And if we have time, we can just make a note of all the things, that I'm talking about here. It helps you, emotionally. One of the cons of emotional intelligence is also when you talk about analysis paralysis, when you overanalyze situations because you are so sensitive that you are picking up on every cue, the things that are important and the things that are not important. And one of the crucial cons as well is it limits your effectiveness. When you are oversensitive, you won't be able to work properly in a team and effectively. I'm just running through this because I want to keep within my time. So there is a need for you to balance emotional intelligence. And one of the things that will help you is that it's not just for you to be emotionally intelligent, you also need to have the ability to think critically. You need problem-solving skills. So it's not just emotional intelligence. That's what we are highlighting today. But it also goes hand in hand with other skills. And to also recognize, the fact that we have said that there is a bit of it that can be manipulative. So you need to avoid being over-dependent on emotional intelligence. And so how do you develop emotional intelligence? One of the first things you need to do is regularly assess emotional responses and triggers. Like I gave an example about myself. Mindfulness practices. Learn to stay calm within yourself. Whatever situation, count to 10 and just ask yourself, okay, let's calm down. Let's look at this. Let's be rational. Let's be practical rather than be emotional. Also, feedback mechanisms. Seek constructive feedback from peers and mentors. Like I said, when I went for my MBA, it was a wake-up call. It was like, wow, so there are other intelligent people in the world. It was a wake-up call. Empathy exercises. Practice active listening and put yourself in other people's shoes. And so I'm going to end my short presentation with a quote from Dave Lennick. It says, emotional competence is the single most important personal quality that each of us must develop and access to experience a breakthrough. Only through managing our emotions can we access our intellect and our technical competence. An emotionally competent person performs better under pressure. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. I want to thank you especially for this powerful presentation. I picked something from that: analysis paralysis. Don't overanalyze stuff. Without taking too much of our time, I want to invite our executive chairman, Professor Olasade, to please kindly come in before the Q&A. We will invite Professor Olasade at this point. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'm pleased to join you today. I am joining you from Italy. I'm actually on holiday with the family, so it's great to be able to join. It's fantastic to see the good work and the response we've received on this webinar. It's quite good to see how many people who've been able to join us. So thank you for that. I've noticed also, just before I add my comments, that we've got one of our consultants, who is one of our global consultants, is the CEO of a consultancy firm, is in its own right, Mr. Olusoji. I think he is with us as well. I know he would have many things to add, but he may come in during the Q&A if he wants to. Tineke is always a fantastic leadership and emotional intelligence consultant, culture change. So it's great to have that contribution from you, and Maureen, who is based in the UK and has done so many work around leadership as well. It's great to hear from you. And there are quite a few comments in the chat box, so it'll be lovely for us to explore that and for me to hear from as many people, so we could wrap this up into an intelligible consultancy product that we can send out to everyone to deploy wherever you are. We are at a time which many people have called an interesting time, a time of severe disruption. We know that for those of us who are joining in Nigeria and indeed from the UK, from other parts of Africa, from Europe, there's global disruption. So the government and businesses and private sector are seeking to do more with less, because the economics of the world have not performed the way it has in the 10s and the early 20s. And one of the comments that our consultant made at the very beginning is that leadership is about people. So the emotions are tied to people. So if you want more effective leadership, then you need to understand how to lead people better. So understanding yourself, understanding other people that work with you and that you lead, and using that knowledge to deliver more effective, compassionate, and kind leadership. We heard that from the last speaker, talking about if you can be a bit more compassionate, she used the word more emotional in the way you lead people, then you can get more out of them. So there's a drive for productivity, there's a drive for innovation, there's a drive for performance and drive for growth. And so you are asking people to work differently. But before you start pushing people, because you recognize they're not cogs and machines, you need to understand what drives them and how you can use that to enable them to perform better in their work. So I'm quite pleased with the comment. I'm not going to add any specific comments about how you do that. We do have specific programs on compassionate kind leadership and using emotional intelligence more in leadership to drive productivity and performance. But thank you. I just want to say thank you to all the people who have been able to attend. I've seen some colleagues and some staff online as well. So thank you for that. I will let you moderate the questions. There are quite a lot of questions, and it may be that some of the other people may want to answer. The questions do not necessarily need to be answered by the speakers themselves. They would also value hearing from some of us and using the questions to illustrate how we've tackled some of these situations. So Peter, I would hand back to you to continue with that. I just want to say thank you, just in case I'm not able to come in at the end to say my thank you to people who have attended and people who have spoken and those people who would also speak. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the session.
Thank you very much, sir. It's always nice to hear you speak because we learn every time you talk to us. I want to also thank you once again, Mrs. Maureen Cario. Your presentation was insightful. I want to thank our good friend, Mrs. Atinuke Uyewumi as well. There's a lot of takeaways from today's lectures. And I want to thank Dr. Olusoji for joining us. It's a pleasure every time we have you amongst us. And I thank everyone who has joined. Everybody is important. And your contributions and your attendance is appreciated. We're going straight to the Q&A. And I'll read out a few. Once they're answered, we can now take the others. The first question says, how does the application of emotional intelligence by leaders in Nigeria, especially in the private sector, impact employees' retention and organizational loyalty in the face of these economic challenges? That's the first one. The second question says, how do you balance empathy and assertiveness when making tough decisions? I would allow the speakers answer these two questions, and if there are any contributions from the participants, it will be appreciated, and then I'll take the remaining questions. So I would allow Mrs. Atinuke go first, if you don't mind. I don't know if you heard the question correctly. Let me read it out again. How does the application of emotional intelligence by leaders in Nigeria, especially in the private sector, impact employees' retention and organizational loyalty in the face of economic challenges? The second question says, how do you balance company empathy and assertiveness when making tough decisions? Over to you, man, Mrs. Atinuke. If you can give us an insight, and then I'll call on Mrs. Carey to also give us her view.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Those are really good questions that can help us, really look into how to practice emotional intelligence. And yes, the first question, talking about how does it impact employee retention? I know there's this saying that people quit their managers, not the workplace, something like that, So usually when you quit, you're not necessarily quitting the workplace, but it's because of someone there, usually who's not leading well, that people quit. So when you have more leaders who have higher levels of emotional intelligence and who are able to use it effectively, as Mrs. Maureen has told us, you would find out that you have a workplace that people look forward to going and not a place that you dread being. So definitely, yes, it would improve on retention. And talking about economic challenges, it's also important to note, as we said before, the challenges of the economy can actually impact on leaders negatively, most especially in the private sector, because when you're working for government, somehow your money is always there. But when you're a private person, you need to work really extra hard, to even be sure you're going to get something. So if leaders are not careful, they may not be able to handle the pressure well, and it will tell on how they unleash that, the tension on the follower, their subordinates, and that may lead to people quitting, when it starts to affect mental health, for example. So let me also go to the next question, where you said empathy and assertiveness. I think it was a good thing that Mrs. Maureen, had that session, because a lot of times people do not even fully understand what emotional intelligence is. It isn't for manipulation, okay? We're looking for positive results here. And also, it isn't for you to become a doormat. It isn't for you to take on everything that comes at you. It teaches you to put up healthy boundaries, okay? And when I teach this, someone will say, oh, Tinuke, this thing you're talking about, we make a leader start to look like he has bipolar disorder. Because in the morning you're smiling and in the evening you're frowning. I said, that's exactly what emotional stability is. For a leader to wake up and say, today we're going to take the step, and everybody knows you are someone who acts quickly. But another day you have to just hold back a bit, and you're comfortable to hold back. You're not attached to how people see you, okay? So you can empathize, and yes, when people start to take you for granted, you put up those boundaries. That's what it means to be stable. It is when you cannot put boundaries that you are not stable, as a matter of fact. I don't want to start another mini lecture, but I want to believe that somehow, maybe that helps.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Atinuke, for doing justice to that question. Let me also give Mrs. Maureen Carey the opportunity to also chip in a word or two, talking about balancing empathy and assertiveness when you're making decisions. Your views, man.
I truly believe Mrs. Atinuke gave good justice to those questions. I think what I would just want to share is a personal example, and it's really about children. You love your children, and when they're naughty, you close your eyes and you spank them, because you know that if you allow bad behavior, it's going to actually have a negative knock-on effect on you as a parent. And that's just the way it is. And just like she rightly said, is building those boundary lines. And the thing is, when you're emotionally intelligent, especially with your members of staff, over time, you would have earned their respect and their trust. And so the day when you frown, they know that this is not your norm. And they will take the cue to say, you know what, we need to check ourselves, because this lady is always fair and just. And so if you've built that reputation along the way, everybody would know that when you do come down hard, it's with good reason. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, man. Listening to you is really enlightening. Before I go any further, I want to use this opportunity to thank our corporate director, Mrs. Yemi Olasade, for joining us. Thank you, man, for coming. And also, yes, I have Mr. Gideon here who has raised his hands. I think he wants to ask a question. Mr. Gideon, you can go ahead with your question before I go on to the next question. You can go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you very much. My question is from the introductory aspect of Mrs. Atinuke, where she said that a lot of time that leaders were employed back in those days. Leaders were employed based on their grades when they do very well in school. And she said that you being good in what you study does not make you a leader. It does not really translate to being a good leader. To be a good accountant does not mean you are a good leader. Now my question is, do we really place your ability on what you study below this emotional intelligence? Somebody that is very good in his field, let's say an accountant, you study accountancy and you are very good, you are proficient in it, and for one reason or the other, maybe you are not very emotionally intelligent. Now, such a person, if he's being employed as a leader in an organization, will he not do well, having known that he is good in his profession? Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Gideon. I want to leave Mrs. Atinuke to answer that question. I believe Mrs. Atinuke heard Mr. Gideon clearly. Over to you, man.
Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Gideon. Yes, for you to ask questions, it means you were following and you definitely took something away. So one of the reasons people may not really rise within the organization is because they limit themselves to just their technical skills. Remember, I talked about that. So when you're a great accountant, we are happy, okay? But the higher you go in the organization, the more you're being rated, not just on your technical competence, but on your ability to work effectively with other people. So at the time that they're looking for someone to lead, even though you're a good accountant, they may not choose you as the rightful person, to be in that position, because those skills are different. And I think we hammered on it that, yes, you need your technical skills. As a matter of fact, when you join, it's just you just want to show that you know how to do your work. But when you're leading, you do less of those technical things and you do more of, working with people who are doing those things now. So leadership skills are a must for any leadership position. Thank you.
Peter, can I add a comment to that, to what my colleague has just said? So yes, we did some work with the bank. Some of us may remember quite a few years ago in Lagos, and the bank complained about a major crisis in the quality of their leadership. And the CEO, I can't name the bank for obvious reasons. The CEO said that the reason this happened was over time they had promoted many people to become leaders because they were good at getting accounts. So they were getting big accounts and they were getting businesses. So, this one brought in 20 billion, this one brought in 50 billion. So they made them a manager, a senior manager, and a director. And then they realized that most of the regional directors were technical people with little management competence. And that was running down the bank. So that's what we've just heard. That could be a major problem where people are looked at simply because of their technical competence and they're not developed as a leader or as a manager.
Wow. Thank you so much for that comment, sir. Thank you very much. That really answers the question. I want to go to the next question, and this question will be directed to Mrs. Maureen Kariu. Pardon me if it looks like I'm calling you too much. You're in the UK, I'm in Nigeria, and it's good to talk across the seas. The next question says, in a scenario where an organization lacks proper and timely communication, particularly regarding delays in salary payments, and fails to provide essential tools, such as laptops, for staff productivity, how can employees demonstrate emotional intelligence while still being expected to meet goals and targets? How do you expect productivity when morale is low? This question is directed to you, Ma. You want to give us your insight?
Thank you very much. I think, first of all, we need to lay the ground, the foundation that is definitely not the best place for employees to be in a position where they don't have the tools to work. That's why we have what we call human resources, because humans in a sense are the tools to get the job done. And if you don't give people the tools with which to work, you yourself are, against productivity for your organization. So now, putting that burden of responsibility on staff to produce when you have not given them the tools is definitely not on. And what I would say, this is the reason why we have unions. That's how unions came into being. Staff needed a voice to come together to make a representation of their desires, of their demands. And when you look at what's the word I'm looking for? Like when we wanted to call the end to slavery or end of apartheid, there has to be a group of people coming together. So what I'm saying in effect is staff of that particular workplace would need to come together and maybe choose a representative to say, look, we want to do this work, but we need to be enabled, equipped, empowered to be able to do it. If not, we can't do it. We've heard, Mrs. Satinuke said it. The fact that you're exhibiting emotional intelligence doesn't mean you have to be a doormat. What you don't have, you don't have. So, and that's where assertiveness comes in, even though you are being emotionally intelligent. So don't make yourself a doormat. Get your message across, but in an emotionally intelligent way that will bring about positive results.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I love how you rounded that up. I want to use this opportunity to thank everybody from across the globe, everybody who has joined us from other African countries. I want to also thank our corporate director for joining, and I thank you especially the speakers, but I won't be the one to give the closing remarks. I would want to call on Professor Olasade, but before I do that, please, we will be sending responses to your questions in the videos that we'll be sending shortly. At this point, I would like to call Professor Olasade, sir, to kindly give us your closing remarks. Professor Olasade, sir.
Right. Thank you again. Wow. There's not much to say. I think our speakers have done justice to it. I mean, we covered a topic that is quite huge, and it's quite difficult to cover that in a webinar of an hour. But we've listened to the highlights. We've listened to the key issues and the potential pitfall if it's not done correctly. So I just want to say thank you. Thanks to the speakers who have given up the time to do that. Thanks to the participants who have given up time to be part of it. We will wrap up some of the answers to the other questions and send them round. And we would invite you to future. I think the next webinar is on digitization, innovation, and artificial intelligence next month, and how you use that to, at the time when there is financial constraint and then economic difficulties, how you use AI to source alternative revenue for businesses and indeed for government, and a way to partner with people who can fund your projects. So we want to explore that, because I know that that's a key area that is of need. Peter has done a fantastic job. I think we need to thank him as well, and the people who have supported him both in Lagos and Abuja. So Mr. Iwumi, Mrs. Keru, and the rest of you, thank you very much, and have a blessed day wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. We have come to the end of this webinar. We look forward to seeing you next month. TL First is a global leader, and we are experts in leadership, management, and consulting. It was nice interacting with all of us. May God bless us. See you again soon next month. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.